The stagecoach lurched violently as it hit another rut in the endless desert road, throwing Eleanor Whitmore against the worn leather seat. She clutched her small carpetbag tighter. The only possession that mattered now, inside were forged papers bearing the name Eleanor Mason, a widow from Ohio seeking a fresh start in the territories. The truth was far darker, buried beneath layers of lies as thick as the dust coating everything in this God-forsaken land. New Mexico territory stretched before her like a burnt canvas, all ochre and rust beneath a merciless August sun. The heat pressed down like an iron weight, making the air shimmer with false promises of water. Eleanor pulled her black mourning veil lower, though whether she mourned her dead husband or her former life, she could no longer say, perhaps both, perhaps neither. Through the coach window, she watched the landscape transform from gentle hills to harsh mesas, from scattered junipers to sparse creosote bushes clinging to life in the alkaline soil. Each mile took her further from Kansas, further from the blood-soaked floorboards of her husband's office where Deputy Marshal James Whitmore had met his end. Shot 3 times in the chest by persons unknown. The newspapers said Eleanor knew better. She'd seen the ledgers, the names, the money changing hands. She'd made the mistake of asking questions. 3 Pines coming up, ma'am. The driver called down. End of the line for you. Eleanor straightened her spine, a gesture that had become armor these past months. 3 Pines, barely a name on any map. A place so remote that even vengeance might lose her trail. The coach rolled to a stop before a collection of sun-bleached buildings that dared call itself a town. A general store, a saloon, a livery stable, and a few dozen other structures scattered like dice thrown by a careless hand. She stepped down into the afternoon heat, her black dress immediately oppressive in the sun. The few townspeople visible stopped their activities to stare. A woman, alone, dressed for mourning, was unusual enough to warrant curiosity even in a place that prided itself on minding its own business. Mrs. Mason, a thin man in spectacles emerged from the general store. I'm Hiram Crawford. Got your telegram about the property rental. Eleanor nodded, grateful he used her false name without question. Mr. Crawford, I trust everything is in order. Yes, ma'am, the old Morrison place, just like you asked. 1.5 miles north, following the creek. Been empty near 2 years now since the Morrisons moved back east. He paused, wringing his hands. You sure about this, ma'am? It's awful isolated for a woman alone. Isolation is precisely what I require. Mr. Crawford. She pressed a month's rent into his palm. I seek only quiet and solitude to properly observe my mourning. He pocketed the money but didn't look reassured. Well, if you're certain, I should warn you, though. He glanced around and lowered his voice. That property backs up to Apache land. Well, what used to be Apache land before the government pushed them out. Still, there's one who didn't go to the reservation, goes by Taza, half-breed. They say his mother was Apache, father was, well, nobody knows for sure. Does he pose a danger? Crawford shifted uncomfortably. Can't say he's ever hurt anyone unprovoked, but he's not. Civilized, if you take my meaning. Lives up in the rocks like an animal. Folks see him sometimes at dawn or dusk, hunting. Best you stay clear of him. Eleanor merely nodded. After what she'd fled, one half-Apache hermit seemed a small concern. Crawford arranged for the livery to take her and her few belongings to the property. The wagon ride proved rougher than the stagecoach, following a track that could barely be called a road. The creek ran low this time of year, more a series of stagnant pools than flowing water. But cottonwoods along its banks provided the only green in the brown landscape. The cabin sat beneath a red sandstone bluff, small but solid, built of adobe and weathered timber. Inside, dust covered every surface, and Eleanor could see sky through gaps in the roof. But it had a sound floor, thick walls, and most importantly, it was hidden from the main road by a bend in the creek and a stand of mesquite. You sure about this, ma'am? The wagon driver asked, setting down her trunk. Town's a long walk if you need anything. I'm quite certain. Thank you. He left reluctantly. and Eleanor stood alone in the doorway of her new refuge. The silence was absolute save for the whisper of wind through the mesquite thorns. She removed her veil and gloves, setting them aside. Eleanor Mason would wear mourning clothes and keep her grief visible, but here, alone, Eleanor Whitmore could finally breathe. She spent the remaining daylight hours making the cabin habitable, sweeping out pack rat nests, checking for snakes, drawing water from the well. As the sun dropped toward the western mesas, painting the rocks in shades of blood and fire, she heard it, the sound of something large moving through the brush. Eleanor froze, hand instinctively moving to the small pistol hidden in her skirts. Through the window, she saw him, a figure emerging from the desert like he'd been formed from the red earth itself. Tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the fluid grace of a predator. He carried a freshly killed javelina across his shoulders, blood still dripping from the wild pig's throat. This had to be Taza. Even at a distance, she could see his mixed heritage in his features, the high cheekbones and bronze skin of his Apache blood. But something else in the breadth of his shoulders, the way he carried himself. His hair hung long and black, held back by a strip of leather. He wore deerskin pants and a cotton shirt open at the chest, a knife at his belt. He stopped suddenly, as if sensing observation. His head turned slowly toward her cabin, and even across 50 yards, Eleanor felt the weight of his gaze. Dark eyes found hers through the window, holding them with an intensity that made her step back. They stood frozen in mutual assessment, the widow in black and the half-blood hunter, each measuring the other as potential threat or mere curiosity. Then he shifted the pig's weight and continued on, disappearing into the rocks to the north as silently as he'd appeared. Eleanor released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Her hands trembled slightly as she lit the oil lamp against the gathering darkness. That night, sleep came fitfully. The cabin creaked in the cooling air, and every sound made her start. But it wasn't fear of animals or the harsh land that kept her awake. It was the past, following her even here, in her dreams. She stood again in James's office, the letters spread across his desk, names of Apache men arrested on false charges, sold to mining companies as convict labor, her husband's signature on every document, the terrible argument that followed, his hand across her face, her threat to go to the federal marshals, his laugh. Who'd believe a woman over a deputy marshal? She woke with tears on her cheeks, the taste of fear metallic in her mouth. Outside, coyotes called to each other across the darkness, their cries echoing off the canyon walls. Eleanor rose and went to the door, needing air. The night was crystalline, stars scattered like spilled salt across the black cloth of sky. The Milky Way arched overhead, clearer than she'd ever seen it back in Kansas. A shadow moved near the creek. Her breath caught, but then she saw it was just a deer coming to drink. Still, the feeling persisted, eyes watching from the darkness. Not hostile, exactly, but aware, alert. Half Apache, half devil. Crawford had said. Eleanor pulled her shawl tighter. She'd known devils. They wore badges and went to church on Sundays. Whatever Taza was, he couldn't be worse than what she'd left behind. The next days blended together in a rhythm of basic survival. She patched the roof, learned which plants the rabbits wouldn't eat and planted a small garden, discovered which pools in the creek still held water. The town was indeed a long walk, but she made it once a week for supplies, maintaining her role as the grieving widow who wished only to be left alone. And always, she felt watched, not constantly, but often enough. Sometimes she'd glimpse movement on the ridges, a figure observing her struggles with the stubborn well pump or her attempts to chase rabbits from her beans. Once, she found the tracks of boots near her cabin, larger than any she'd seen in town, but nothing was disturbed. No threat implied, just watching. The feeling should have frightened her more than it did. Instead, it felt almost like a strange guardianship. The land was teaching her its harsh lessons, but someone was ensuring she survived them. When she found a rattlesnake coiled in her woodpile one morning, There was already a forked stick propped nearby, perfect for dealing with it. When her water barrel developed a leak, she discovered a cake of pine pitch left on her doorstep, ideal for sealing it. 3 weeks into her exile, Eleanor made a decision. The next time she sensed that presence, instead of ignoring it, she stepped out of her cabin and looked directly at the ridge where she knew he watched. "I know you're there," she called out, her voice carrying in the still air. "I mean no harm to you or this land. I seek only peace." For a long moment, nothing. Then a figure stood from behind the rocks, silhouetted against the evening sky. Even at a distance, she could see his stillness was that of a man deciding whether to be predator or prey. Or perhaps neither. Perhaps something else entirely. He made no move to come closer, but he didn't retreat either. They stood like that, two damaged souls recognizing something familiar in each other across the gulf of space and circumstance. Then he turned and vanished into the gathering shadows, leaving Eleanor with the strangest feeling, not fear, not even curiosity exactly, but something deeper. Recognition, perhaps, as if the land itself had introduced them, knowing what she didn't yet, that their fates were already intertwining like roots beneath the desert soil. The wolf appeared at dusk, a gray shadow slinking toward Eleanor's cabin with the patient hunger of a predator that knew its prey had nowhere to run. Eleanor spotted it from her window as she prepared her meager supper, beans and cornbread, the same as every night. The creature circled her chicken coop, testing the wire with its nose, yellow eyes gleaming in the failing light. She grabbed her pistol, hands trembling not from fear, but from the knowledge that she had only 3 bullets left. The wolf was thin, ribs showing through its matted coat, desperate enough to risk approaching human habitation. Eleanor stepped onto her porch, the boards creaking beneath her feet. "Get on!" she shouted, firing a warning shot into the air. The wolf startled but didn't flee, merely backing away a few paces. Lips pulled back to reveal yellowed fangs. That's when Taza materialized from the shadows like he'd been formed from them. One moment the space beside her cabin was empty. The next, he stood there, bow drawn, arrow nocked. The wolf saw him too, and something in its primitive brain recognized a more dangerous predator. But hunger drove it forward one more step. The arrow flew silent and true. Catching the wolf behind the shoulder, it dropped without a sound, legs twitching once before stillness claimed it. Taza lowered his bow and walked to the carcass, kneeling beside it with something almost like reverence. "Starving," he said, his voice deeper than she'd expected, accented but clear. "Driven from the pack, sick, maybe." He looked up at her then, those dark eyes holding hers. Would have kept coming back. Eleanor found herself stepping off the porch, drawn by something she couldn't name. Up close, she could see the weathering on his face. Not age, for he couldn't be more than 30, but the marks of a hard life lived under unforgiving sun and wind. A thin scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, white against bronze skin. "Thank you," she managed. He stood, and she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. "You waste bullets shooting at sky." Despite everything, Eleanor felt her lips twitch toward a smile. "I suppose I do." They stood in awkward silence, the dead wolf between them. Then Taza bent and hefted the carcass over his shoulder with easy strength. "Pelt might be worth something. Meat's no good." He paused, seeming to wrestle with something internal. "You need to learn." "Learn what?" "How to live here, not die here." The blunt words should have offended her, but Eleanor heard the truth in them. She'd been playing at survival, getting by on luck and his unseen assistance. And who would teach me? He studied her for a long moment, and she had the sensation of being weighed and measured by standards she didn't understand. Finally, he jerked his head toward the ridge. "Tomorrow. Dawn, bring water." Then he was gone, vanishing into the darkness with the wolf's body, leaving Eleanor to wonder what she'd just agreed to. She barely slept that night, starting at every sound. When the first pale light touched the eastern sky, she was already dressed and waiting, a canteen slung over her shoulder. Taza appeared as the sun crested the horizon, casting long shadows across the desert floor. "Come," was all he said. What followed was the strangest education Eleanor had ever received. He showed her which plants held water in their flesh, which insects meant rain was coming, how to read the tracks of every creature that passed through her territory. His teaching method was mostly silence and demonstration. He'd point, she'd observe. Understanding would come or it wouldn't. "See?" He knelt by a small depression in the sand. "Rattlesnake moved through here last night, going to water." Eleanor studied the S-shaped pattern. "How do you know when?" "Sand falls back certain way. Morning dew hasn't touched it yet." He stood, brushing dust from his hands. "You walk too loud. Announce yourself to everything." She bristled. "I'm not trying to sneak." "No, but you should know how." He demonstrated, placing each foot with deliberate care. "Heel to toe. Feel before you commit weight, like this." She tried to imitate him and nearly lost her balance. His hand shot out, steadying her elbow, and the contact sent an unexpected jolt through her arm. He pulled back quickly, as if he'd felt it too. "Again," he said roughly. They spent hours in the desert, until the sun reached its zenith and the heat became unbearable. Eleanor's dress was soaked with sweat, her hair escaping from its proper pins. She felt exposed, uncivilized, nothing like the marshal's wife she'd once been. Perhaps that was the point. "Tomorrow," Taza said as they neared her cabin. "Same time." "Why are you doing this?" The question escaped before she could stop it. He paused, not looking at her. "This land, it takes, or it teaches. Better you learn than feed the buzzards." But Eleanor sensed there was more. Something unspoken in the way he avoided her gaze. She didn't press. Some truths she'd learned revealed themselves in their own time. The days fell into a pattern. Dawn lessons that stretched into morning, covering everything from finding water to building proper fires that wouldn't send up smoke signals. Taza was a demanding teacher, patient but expecting perfection. Eleanor's soft hands grew calloused. Her pale skin browned despite her bonnets. Her body adapted to the rhythms of the desert, and slowly, carefully, they began to talk. "Your mother was Apache?" she asked one morning as they rested in the shade of a massive boulder. His jaw tightened. "White-painted woman clan. Dead now." "I'm sorry." He shrugged, but she saw the tension in his shoulders. "Army came when I was 12. Wanted us on the reservation. Mother refused. He stopped, staring at the horizon. "I survived, learned to live between worlds. Neither accepts me, so I accept neither." Eleanor understood that feeling too well. "My husband is dead too," she said carefully, testing the weight of truth. 3 months now. "You don't mourn him." It wasn't a question. She looked at him sharply. "What makes you say that? You wear the clothes, but not the sorrow." "Your eyes." He finally met her gaze. "They carry fear, not grief." The perception unnerved her. How much else did he see? But something in his steady gaze invited honesty. He wasn't a good man. Taza nodded as if this confirmed something he'd already known. They sat in companionable silence. Two people who'd learned the hard way that sometimes the dead were better left ungrieved. One morning, Eleanor decided to return some of his kindness. She'd spent the previous evening baking, and when Taza arrived at dawn, she offered him fresh bread with honey she'd bought in town. He stared at the offering as if it might bite. "Why?" "Because you've helped me. Because—" She struggled for words. "Because it's what people do. Share food." He took the bread slowly, tasted it with the caution of a wild animal trying something new. His eyes widened slightly, the most expression she'd seen from him. "Good," he admitted. She hid her smile. "My grandmother's recipe." They ate in silence on her porch, watching the sun paint the rocks in shades of rose and gold. It should have been awkward, this sharing of space and food, but instead it felt natural. Right, somehow. That day's lesson took them farther than usual, following a game trail up into the canyonlands. Eleanor had grown stronger. her stride more confident, but the steep climb still challenged her. Halfway up a particularly treacherous slope, her foot slipped on loose shale. She felt herself falling backward, a cry escaping her lips. Strong arms caught her, pulled her against a solid chest. For a moment, she was surrounded by the scent of leather and sage, the warmth of another human being. Her hands had instinctively gripped his shoulders, and she could feel the play of muscle beneath the worn cotton shirt. They froze, bodies pressed together on the narrow trail. Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs, and she knew he must feel it. His breath stirred the loose hair at her temple. Slowly, she lifted her gaze to his face, finding his dark eyes already on hers. Something shifted in their depths, a heat that had nothing to do with the desert sun. "Careful," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "Yes," she breathed, though she wasn't sure what she was agreeing to. He set her back on her feet with careful hands, maintaining distance between them. But Eleanor still felt the phantom warmth of his touch, the solid safety of his arms. They continued up the trail in charged silence. At the top, the view stole what breath the climb hadn't taken. The entire valley spread below them, a tapestry of red rock and green cottonwoods following the creek's meandering path. Taza pointed to distant landmarks, naming them in Apache and English both. His voice had gentled, sharing his world with her. "Beautiful," Eleanor murmured. Yes, but when she glanced at him, he wasn't looking at the view. The moment stretched between them, fragile as spun glass. Eleanor felt herself swaying toward him, drawn by something stronger than propriety or common sense. His hand lifted, hovering near her cheek, not quite touching. "Eleanor," her name on his lips was almost a question. She turned away, breaking the spell. "We should go back. The sun." "Yes." They descended in silence, but everything had changed. The careful distance they'd maintained was gone, replaced by an awareness that sparked with every accidental touch, every shared glance. Eleanor knew she was walking towards something dangerous, something that could destroy the fragile safety she'd built here. But like the wolf drawn by hunger, she couldn't seem to stop herself. That night, she sketched by lamplight, trying to capture the way he'd looked at the canyon's edge, proud and wild and utterly himself. Her fingers traced the lines of his face on paper, memorizing the angles and planes she'd studied when he wasn't watching. The drawings were her secret, hidden beneath her other papers, but they were also an admission she wasn't ready to voice. She was falling for a man who lived between worlds, just as she did. A man whose very existence challenged everything her former life had taught her about civilization and savagery. And despite every rational argument, every warning her mind conjured, her traitorous heart whispered that perhaps, in this harsh and beautiful land, they could create a world of their own. The words came haltingly at first, like water through a broken dam. Eleanor sat on a flat rock beside the creek, her hands folded tightly in her lap, while Taza crouched nearby, ostensibly sharpening his knife, but listening with an intensity that belied his casual posture. "James was a deputy marshal in Kansas Territory," she began, her voice barely above the creek's murmur. "Everyone thought him a fine, upstanding man. He attended church, helped widows, brought criminals to justice." She laughed bitterly. "I thought so too. When I married him, I was 17, and he was handsome in his uniform, with such righteous conviction in his eyes." Taza's hand stilled on the whetstone, but he didn't look up. The first years were acceptable. He was strict, demanding, but I believed that was simply his nature. A lawman must be hard, I told myself. Eleanor picked up a small stone, turning it over in her fingers. Then the territories opened more to settlement, and suddenly there was money to be made, not in law, in lawlessness. She told him about the ledgers she'd found by accident, looking for household accounts. Names of Apache and Mexican men arrested on fabricated charges, sold to mining companies as convict labor, her husband's signature authorizing each transfer, his cut noted in careful script. One name appeared often, Joseph Crowfeather, Arrested 6 times for crimes that couldn't possibly have been committed by the same man, as they happened miles apart on the same days. Her voice caught. I asked James about it, carefully. He laughed, said Indians all looked alike to witnesses anyway. What happened to Crowfeather? Taza's voice was controlled, but Eleanor heard the edge beneath. The 7th arrest. He tried to run. Shot in the back. Attempting escape, the report said. She threw the stone into the creek with sudden violence. James wrote that report. I know because I saw the draft, saw him practicing how to describe a murder as justice. The knife resumed its rhythm against the stone. You confronted him. Foolishly. Yes, I thought if he knew I knew, he'd stop. That shame might reach him where morality hadn't. Eleanor touched her ribs unconsciously, remembering old bruises. Instead, he showed me who he really was. Said I was his wife, his property, and if I breathed a word to anyone, I'd be the one in chains. Who would believe me? The devoted wife accusing the heroic deputy marshal? But you kept the evidence. Eleanor nodded. Hidden. I became someone I didn't recognize. Lying, sneaking, pretending devotion while gathering proof. Then one night, James came home drunk, boasting about a special shipment. 20 Apache men, including 2 boys barely old enough to work. The mining company paid triple for young backs that would last longer. Taza's knuckles whitened around the knife handle. I couldn't let it happen. I took the evidence to the one man I thought might listen, Marshal Davidson, James's superior. He promised to investigate quietly. Eleanor's voice dropped to a whisper. 3 days later, James was dead, shot in his office. Davidson said it was likely revenge from criminals James had arrested. But I saw the truth in his eyes. He'd had James killed to protect himself. James must have kept records implicating him too. And you ran. Davidson made it clear, leave immediately and silently, or be charged as an accomplice to my husband's crimes. He had forged documents ready, proof I'd known all along, that I'd benefited from the blood money. She finally looked at Taza. So yes, I ran, changed my name, came to the edge of nowhere, but I brought copies of those ledgers. Hidden, because someday, I don't know, justice, revenge, or maybe just the hope that those names won't be forgotten. Taza sheathed his knife and stood, prowling to the creek's edge with restless energy. Crowfeather was my mother's cousin, he said finally. A good man, gentle. He made toys for children, sang the old songs. He turned to face her. I wondered how he died. Now I know. Eleanor's chest tightened. I'm sorry. No. He crossed to her in 2 strides, kneeling so they were eye level. You carry guilt for crimes not yours. His blood is not on your hands. I could have acted sooner. Could have died. His hand covered hers, warm and calloused. You think Apache women don't know men like your husband? We have a word. Naltsi, those who wear kindness like a mask while darkness eats their spirit. You survived Naltsi. That takes strength. Eleanor realized she was crying only when he reached out, thumbs gentle as he wiped tears from her cheeks. The tenderness undid her. She leaned forward, pressing her forehead against his shoulder, and felt his arms come around her carefully, as if she might shatter. He made me feel worthless, she whispered into his shirt, like I existed only as his shadow. You are no one's shadow. His voice rumbled through his chest. You are the woman who faced down a wolf, who learns the desert's ways, who keeps names of the dead so they won't be forgotten. His hand stroked her hair, loosening more pins. You burn bright, Eleanor, maybe too bright for small men to bear. She lifted her head, finding his face inches from hers. His eyes held depths she wanted to drown in. Without thought, her hand rose to trace the scar on his cheek. He went still, not breathing. How? She asked softly. Soldier's saber. I was 15, trying to stop them from... He caught her hand, pressing it flat against his cheek. Old pain, like yours. The air between them crackled. Eleanor felt herself leaning closer, drawn by forces older than thought. His free hand tangled in her hair, tilting her face up. She could see the moment he surrendered to whatever pulled them together, his eyes darkening as his head lowered. The kiss was nothing like her husband's demanding possessiveness. Taza's lips were firm but gentle, asking rather than taking. Eleanor's world narrowed to this: the warmth of his mouth, the slight roughness of his jaw, the way he cradled her face like something precious. She made a soft sound, and his arms tightened, drawing her closer. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Eleanor felt exposed in ways that had nothing to do with physical intimacy. Taza rested his forehead against hers, eyes closed. "I should not," he murmured. "You deserve better than—" "Stop." Eleanor placed her fingers over his lips. "Don't tell me what I deserve. I've had enough of men deciding that for me." His eyes opened, searching hers. What he found there made him pull her close again, this kiss deeper, more certain. Eleanor felt the last walls around her heart crumbling. Here, with this man who lived between worlds, she could stop running, stop hiding, simply be. "Come," Taza said when they finally parted. "I want to show you something." He led her higher into the canyon, following paths she couldn't see. The sun was setting, painting the rocks in shades of blood and flame. Finally, he stopped before what looked like solid stone, then revealed a hidden entrance barely wide enough for one person. Inside, the cave opened into a natural cathedral. Fading light filtered through cracks above, illuminating walls covered in ancient paintings, spirals and animals and human figures dancing across stone. But newer additions caught her eye: carefully tended bundles, a woman's dress, a child's moccasins. "My mother's place," Taza said quietly. "Where she came to pray. Where she—" He touched a dark stain on the floor. "Where I brought her body." Eleanor understood the trust this represented, this sacred space, this private grief. He was sharing the deepest parts of himself. She moved to him, taking his hand. She was white-painted woman clan. He nodded. "Born to ceremony, trained in the old ways. She tried to teach me, but I was young, more interested in horses than holy things. Now—" He gestured at the cave paintings. "Now I try to remember, to honor. But I am half lost between worlds, as she knew I would be." "Not lost," Eleanor said firmly. "Different. Bridging. Maybe that's what the world needs, people who stand between, who can see both sides." He looked at her with something like wonder. "You understand. I'm learning to—" They stood together in the sacred space as darkness fell outside. When Taza lit a small fire from supplies cached in the cave, the paintings seemed to come alive, dancing in the flickering light. He showed her his mother's belongings, spoke her name, Dasodahai, moving light, and told stories of her strength and wisdom. "She would have liked you," he said suddenly. "A woman who chooses her own path, who carries steel beneath softness." Eleanor felt honored and humbled. "I wish I could have known her." "You do, in a way. Her teachings live in what I share with you, her strength in how you survive." He pulled Eleanor against him, her back to his chest, arms wrapped around her. "She told me once I would know my match by how they met the desert, with fear or respect. You show respect even in your fear. That is wisdom." They stayed in the cave as the fire burned low, sharing warmth and whispered conversations. Eleanor told him about her grandmother, the only person who'd ever made her feel valued before she met him. He spoke of learning to track before he could properly walk, of the massacre that took his clan, of years spent alone learning to be ghost and man both. When the moon rose full, casting silver light through the cave entrance, Taza stirred. "I should take you back. Should you?" Eleanor turned in his arms, meeting his gaze boldly. "Or is that what's expected? What's proper?" His breath caught. "Eleanor, I've lived my whole life by shoulds, married who I should, stayed silent when I should, ran when I should." She traced the open collar of his shirt, feeling his pulse jump beneath her fingers. "Tonight, I want to choose. No shoulds. Just this." The fire in his eyes matched her own. He crushed her against him, his kiss fierce with long-denied hunger. Eleanor responded with equal fervor. pouring all her fear and loneliness and need into the connection between them. They sank onto the blankets beside the dying fire, hands learning the map of each other's pain and promise. In the sacred cave where his mother had prayed, beneath paintings that had witnessed centuries of love and loss, two broken souls found wholeness in each other. And when dawn came, painting the desert in soft pastels, Eleanor knew that whatever dangers still pursued her, she would face them differently now. No longer alone, no longer afraid. She had found something worth fighting for. The whispers started at Crawford's general store. Eleanor noticed the sudden silences when she entered, the way conversations resumed in hushed tones after she'd passed. Mrs. Morrison, the banker's wife, pulled her skirts aside rather than risk them brushing Eleanor's. Tom Bradley, who'd always tipped his hat before, now looked through her as if she were invisible. "The usual supplies. Mr. Crawford?" Eleanor kept her voice steady, though her hands trembled as she placed coins on the counter. Crawford wouldn't meet her eyes. Perhaps you might consider using the back entrance next time, Mrs. Mason. Some of the ladies are, well, they're particular about their shopping companions." The word stung, but Eleanor raised her chin. "I'll use whatever entrance suits me, Mr. Crawford. My money spends the same as theirs." She left with her provisions, feeling the weight of stairs boring into her back. The 3-mile walk to her cabin had never seemed longer. Halfway home, she finally allowed the tears to fall. Not for their scorn, she'd expected that, but for the life she'd carved out here, the fragile peace now threatened by wagging tongues. Taza was waiting at her cabin, having brought fresh venison. He took one look at her face, and his expression darkened. "What happened?" "Nothing new." Eleanor set down her supplies with excessive care. "Just good Christian folk showing their true nature." His jaw tightened. "Because of me. Because of their small minds." She turned to him fiercely. "I won't let them." "Eleanor." He caught her shoulders gently. "This is just the beginning. It will get worse." She knew he was right. In the weeks since they'd become lovers, she'd foolishly hoped their secret might remain hidden. But nothing stayed secret long in a small town, and someone had seen Taza leaving her property at dawn. "I don't care what they think." "You should." His thumb stroked her arms. "These people, they can make life impossible. Force you out, hurt you. Let them try." But even as she said it, Eleanor felt a chill of premonition. It came 3 days later in the form of hoofbeats approaching her cabin. Eleanor looked up from her garden to see a lone rider, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing the remnants of a Union uniform. Her blood turned to ice. She knew that easy slouch in the saddle, that cruel slash of a mouth. Deputy Bill Kerrigan, her late husband's partner in corruption. Well. Kerrigan dismounted, his pale eyes raking over her with possessive familiarity. "Martha Whitmore, though I hear you're going by Eleanor Mason these days." Eleanor's hand inched toward the rifle propped against her porch. "That woman is dead." "Is she?" Kerrigan advanced slowly, like a cat toying with a mouse. "Funny thing, she looks mighty alive to me. Living under a false name, that's fraud, and fleeing Kansas after her husband's murder, that looks suspicious. I had nothing to do with James's death, maybe not directly." He stopped just out of reach, hooking his thumbs in his gun belt. "But you took things that didn't belong to you. Papers, evidence. Marshal Davidson wants them back." So, that was it. They weren't just trying to silence her. They needed the proof she'd hidden. "I don't know what you're talking about." Kerrigan's expression hardened. "Don't play games. Martha, you were always too clever for your own good. James should have kept you on a tighter leash." "James is dead." Eleanor's voice was ice. "And my name is Eleanor." He moved faster than she expected, grabbing her arm and yanking her against him. "Your name is whatever I say it is." His breath reeked of whiskey and tobacco. "You owe me, woman. I covered for your husband more times than I can count. Now he's gone, and you're going to pay his debts." Eleanor tried to wrench free, but his grip tightened brutally. "Let go." "Or what? You'll call for help? Who's going to come? Your savage lover?" He laughed at her shocked expression. "Oh, yes, I heard all about that in town. The proper widow spreading her legs for a half-breed. James would be spinning in his grave. James was a monster." Eleanor spat the words. "And you're worse." Kerrigan's free hand cracked across her face, snapping her head to the side. "Watch your tongue, or I'll—" The arrow took him in the shoulder, spinning him away from Eleanor. He screamed, clutching at the shaft, and looked up to find Taza standing 20 yards away. "Another arrow already knocked. Next one goes through your throat," Taza said calmly. Kerrigan fumbled for his pistol with his good hand. Taza's second arrow pinned that hand to his thigh. The deputy howled, collapsing to his knees. "You're dead!" Kerrigan gasped through the pain. "Both of you! I'll see you hang—" Taza crossed the distance in long strides, kicking the pistol away. He knelt beside Kerrigan, and Eleanor saw something in his face that made her stomach clench. Not rage, but cold calculation. "You will leave," Taza said quietly. "Tonight? Tell whoever sent you that she has nothing they want. The past is buried with her husband. She has evidence. She has a new life." Taza twisted the arrow slightly, making Kerrigan whimper. "You will not take that from her. Understand?" Kerrigan nodded frantically. Taza yanked both arrows free, eliciting fresh screams. "Go! If I see you again, if anyone troubles her again, I will find you, and I will take much longer than arrows to make my point." He hauled Kerrigan to his horse, threw him across the saddle. The deputy managed to pull himself upright, cradling his wounded arm. "This isn't over," he snarled. "You can't protect her forever, savage!" Taza slapped the horse's rump, sending it galloping toward town with its bleeding burden. Then he turned to Eleanor, his expression softening with concern. Her cheek was already swelling from Kerrigan's blow. "Let me see." His fingers were infinitely gentle as they probed the bruise. "I should have killed him." "No." Eleanor caught his hand. "You showed mercy. That makes you better than them." "Mercy." He spoke the word like it tasted bitter. "My mother would say mercy is for those who deserve it. That man is gone. That's what matters." But Eleanor knew it wasn't true. Kerrigan would be back, with more men, with the law on his side. "Taza, what he said about hanging, they could do it. Lynch law. No trial, no justice. Let them try." His arms came around her, solid and protective. "I have survived worse than frightened townspeople." That night, they made love with desperate urgency, as if trying to forge a connection strong enough to withstand the storm coming for them. Eleanor traced every scar on his body, memorizing the map of his survival. He worshipped her with hands and mouth until she forgot her own name, forgot everything but the ancient rhythm binding them together. Afterward, they lay entwined beneath the stars. They'd moved outside, preferring open sky to walls that might become a trap. Taza played with her hair, now completely free of its proper pins. "You could leave," he said quietly. "Go east, where no one knows either name you've worn. Start fresh." "Without you?" Eleanor rose on one elbow to look at him. "Never. I cannot go east. Cities are cages to me, but you—" "Stop." She pressed her fingers to his lips. "My place is here, with you. Whatever comes." He caught her hand, pressing it to his chest where his heart beat strong and steady. "You humble me, woman, and you save me, every day." Eleanor laid her head on his shoulder. "Though I fear what saving me might cost you, some things are worth any cost." They dozed fitfully, taking comfort in each other's warmth. Near dawn, Taza suddenly tensed, his hand moving to the knife always within reach. "What is it?" Eleanor whispered. "Horses, many." He was already moving, pulling on clothes with swift efficiency. "Get dressed, quickly." Eleanor's hands shook as she fumbled with buttons. The approaching hoofbeats grew louder, too many for random travelers. This was what they'd both known was coming. "The cave," Taza said urgently. "You remember the way? Go there. Wait for— I'm not leaving you." "Eleanor, no!" She grabbed her rifle, checking the load. "We stand together or not at all." He looked at her for one burning moment, then nodded. Together. They took position on her porch as the riders came into view. 8 men, Kerrigan at their head despite his bandaged wounds. Some wore badges, others the hard look of hired guns. They spread out in a semicircle, cutting off escape routes. "Martha Whitmore," Kerrigan called out, his voice carrying satisfaction despite the pain he must be in. "By the authority vested in me by the territory of Kansas, you're under arrest for theft, fraud, and suspicion of murder. Come quietly, and your companion might live." Eleanor felt Taza tense beside her, ready to fight impossible odds. She made her choice. "The only authority you have is corruption?" she shouted back. "I have evidence of your crimes, yours and Davidson's and all the rest. Touch either of us, and it goes to federal marshals." Kerrigan's laugh was ugly. "Bluff all you want. You're coming with us. Over my dead body. That can be arranged." "Boys." 8 guns cleared leather. Beside her, Taza knocked an arrow, knowing it was futile against those odds but ready to die fighting. Eleanor raised her rifle, equally determined. The moment stretched taut, death hovering on the desert wind, and Eleanor knew with crystal clarity that however this ended, she regretted nothing. She'd found love, found herself, found a man worth dying beside. "Together," she whispered. "Always," he replied. The sun crested the horizon, painting the world in blood and gold, as their enemies closed in for the kill. The first shot came from Kerrigan's man on the left, splintering the porch post inches from Eleanor's head. Taza's arrow flew in response, taking the shooter in the chest. But there were too many. Eleanor fired, worked the rifle's lever, fired again, watching men dive for cover, but they were closing in, and she had only 4 bullets left. "Inside," Taza commanded, pushing her toward the door as gunfire erupted from all sides. They stumbled into the cabin, slamming the door as bullets punched through the thin wood. Eleanor overturned the table for cover while Taza knocked out window glass with his bow, loosing arrows at any exposed target. "Martha!" Kerrigan's voice carried over the gunfire. "This doesn't have to end bloody. Give us the papers and you can walk away." "Go to hell!" Eleanor shouted back, then gasped as Taza suddenly spun and fell, crimson spreading across his shoulder. "Just a graze," he said through gritted teeth. But Eleanor saw how his left arm hung useless. She tore strips from her petticoat, binding the wound as bullets continued to pepper the walls. They were trapped, outgunned, with nowhere to run. Outside. She could hear Kerrigan organizing his men for a final assault. "There's something else," Eleanor said urgently. "Under the floorboards by the stove, a metal box." Taza pried up the boards with his good hand, revealing her hidden cache. Inside were the copied ledgers, but also something else. A letter she'd never shown him, addressed to the federal marshal's office in Denver. "If something happens to me," she said, reloading her rifle with trembling hands, "get this to them. Promise me. Nothing will happen." The door exploded inward. Men poured through. Too many to fight. Eleanor got one shot off before rough hands seized her, tearing the rifle away. She saw Taza rise like an avenging spirit, knife in his good hand, taking down 2 men before a gun butt to the skull dropped him. "No!" Eleanor fought wildly as they dragged her outside, but a backhanded blow left her ears ringing. Kerrigan stood over Taza's unconscious form, revolver drawn. "String him up, boys. Let's show these savages what happens when they touch white women." "Wait," Eleanor forced the word through split lips. "I'll give you everything, the papers, the evidence, all of it. Just let him go." Kerrigan's smile was vicious. "Oh, you'll give us everything anyway. But your breed needs to watch, needs to learn." They dragged Taza to the large cottonwood by the creek, throwing a rope over a sturdy branch. Eleanor watched in horror as they fitted the noose around his neck, his body limp, blood from his shoulder staining the ground. "Please," she begged, hating herself for it. "I'll do anything, sign anything, just don't—" "Wake him up," Kerrigan ordered. "I want him conscious for this." A bucket of creek water brought Taza around, coughing and disoriented. His eyes found Eleanor's, held even as they hauled him upright. There was no fear in his gaze, only sorrow. Not for himself, but for her. "Should have stayed in Kansas. Martha," Kerrigan said conversationally, checking his pocket watch. "Could have been a proper widow, remarried someone suitable. Instead," he gestured at Taza, "you had to degrade yourself with this animal. The only animal here is you." Eleanor's voice was steady despite her tears. "And everyone will know it. I sent copies of those papers to Denver 2 weeks ago. Federal marshals are probably already on their way." Kerrigan's face went white, then purple with rage. He struck her again, knocking her to her knees. "You're lying. Check the postal records in town. Registered mail to the federal building." She spat blood. "You're finished. All of you." For a moment, uncertainty flickered across the men's faces. Federal marshals were a different breed than local law, incorruptible, relentless. If she was telling the truth, that moment of hesitation saved them. The thunder of hoofbeats made everyone turn as a dozen riders crested the ridge. Not more of Kerrigan's men, but Mexican banditos, armed to the teeth and riding hard. "Scatter!" someone yelled. Chaos erupted. The bandits had been raiding along the border for months, and Kerrigan's men knew their reputation. Gunfire exploded from all directions. Men dove for cover, forgetting their prisoners in the face of this new threat. Eleanor didn't waste the opportunity. She lunged for a dropped pistol, came up firing. Her shot took the man guarding Taza in the hip, dropping him. Taza, hands still bound but the noose not yet tightened, managed to slip the rope over his head. "Eleanor!" She spun to see Kerrigan bearing down on her, face twisted with fury. His gun came up, and time seemed to slow. Eleanor knew she couldn't bring her weapon around in time. This was how she would die, not at the end of a rope, but looking down the barrel of a corrupt lawman's gun. The knife took Kerrigan in the throat. He staggered, eyes wide with shock, hands going to the blade. Taza stood behind him, hands somehow free, covered in blood but upright through sheer will. Kerrigan fell, gurgling his life into the desert sand. "Can you ride?" Taza asked urgently. Around them, the battle between bandits and Kerrigan's men raged. "Yes." They ran for the horses, Eleanor covering their retreat with the last rounds in the pistol. Most of Kerrigan's men were dead or fleeing, the bandits busy looting bodies. Their leader, a scarred man with silver conchos on his hat, saw them mounting up. For a moment, their eyes met across the battlefield. Taza said something in Spanish, a rapid exchange Eleanor couldn't follow. The bandit leader laughed, made an elaborate bow from his saddle, then shouted orders to his men. They wouldn't pursue. Eleanor and Taza rode hard north, pushing the horses to their limits. Only when the cabin was miles behind did they slow. Finding shelter in a box canyon Taza knew. He slumped in the saddle, and Eleanor saw his shoulder wound had reopened, his shirt soaked with blood. "We have to stop," she said. "Not yet, not safe." But his body betrayed him, sliding sideways. Eleanor barely managed to ease him to the ground. She worked frantically, using water from her canteen to clean the wound, tearing more strips from her undergarments for bandages. "The letter," he murmured. "You really sent it?" 2 weeks ago. Like I said, I knew they might come." She smoothed his hair back from his fevered face. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you. I was trying to protect you." His hand found hers. Smart woman, always thinking ahead. "Rest now. Save your strength." They sheltered there through the heat of the day. Eleanor kept watch, rifle ready, but saw no pursuit. Perhaps Kerrigan's surviving men had fled back to Kansas. Perhaps the bandits had killed them all. Either way, she and Taza had bought time. As the sun set, Taza's fever broke. He was weak but lucid, able to sit up and take water. "We can't go back," Eleanor said unnecessarily. "That life is over." "Good." He pulled her against him with his good arm. It was never really life anyway, just waiting. Waiting for what? For you. For this. He pressed his lips to her hair. My mother told me once that the spirits send us what we need when we're ready. I thought I needed solitude. Instead, they sent me a warrior disguised as a grieving widow, a woman who faces down wolves and corrupt lawmen with equal courage. His voice roughened with emotion. If you had not come, I would have lived and died alone, thinking that was strength. You taught me better. Eleanor turned in his arms, careful of his wound. And you taught me that surviving isn't the same as living, that some chances are worth taking, no matter the cost. They kissed there in the gathering darkness, sealing promises that needed no words. When the moon rose, they mounted again, riding deeper into the canyon lands where no law reached, where the old ways still held sway. Near midnight, they came upon lights, not a town, but a camp. Apache, Taza confirmed, recognizing the patterns of the fires. Survivors like him who'd refused the reservation, living free in hidden places. Will they accept us? Eleanor asked nervously. We'll see. The sentries challenged them in Apache. Taza responded. And Eleanor heard her name, or rather, the Apache name he'd given her. Shanae. She who stands strong. There was discussion, some argument. Then an elderly woman emerged from the largest wickiup. She studied Eleanor with eyes that had seen empires rise and fall, then spoke at length with Taza. Finally, she nodded, gesturing them into the camp. My mother's aunt. Taza explained quietly. She says you have the spirit of one who belongs nowhere and therefore can belong anywhere. Also, a ghost of a smile touched his lips. She says any woman who can make me forget my pride enough to love must be powerful medicine. Eleanor felt tears threaten. After so much violence and fear, this simple acceptance overwhelmed her. What did you tell her about me? The truth. That you are my heart walking outside my body. That where you go, I go. That your enemies are my enemies. Your battles, my battles. And she accepted that? She said the spirits knew what they were doing when they brought us together. Who is she to argue with the spirits? They were given a place by the fire, food, water to wash. The wound was tended by the medicine woman with skill that put any town doctor to shame. Eleanor found herself surrounded by curious women and children, touching her pale skin and strange clothes with gentle fingers. That night, lying on buffalo robes under a roof of stars, Eleanor finally felt the fear leaving her bones. They were fugitives. Yes, homeless, wanted, living on the margins. But they were alive. They were together, and they were free. I love you, she whispered into the darkness. However far we have to run, however hard the path, I love you. Taza's arm tightened around her. In this life and the next. Shanae. In this life and the next. The first snow came early that year, catching them high in the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. Eleanor pulled the bearskin tighter around her shoulders, watching fat flakes drift past the mouth of their shelter, a natural cave Taza had expanded with patient work throughout the autumn months. Below them, the valley spread white and pristine, no tracks marking its surface save those of deer and elk. Storm will last 3 days, Taza said, reading signs in the wind she was still learning to recognize. He sat by their small fire, working elk sinew into strong cord. His shoulder had healed well, leaving only a puckered scar to join his collection. Eleanor moved from the cave mouth to sit beside him, their movements easy with the familiarity of lovers who'd learned each other's rhythms. 3 months in the wilderness had transformed her. Her hands were brown and capable, her body lean with muscle, her hair often worn in a single braid like the Apache women who'd taught her their ways during their brief stay with the hidden band. Good, she said, surprising herself by meaning it. No one travels in storms like this. He glanced at her, a smile touching his lips. You've become like us, finding safety in what others fear. I've become myself, Eleanor corrected. Finally, they'd kept moving after leaving the Apache camp, always staying ahead of any pursuit. Word had filtered to them through Taza's network of connections. Carrigan was indeed dead. His men scattered. Marshal Davidson had bigger problems, as federal investigators had descended on Kansas following Eleanor's evidence. Several arrests had been made, though Davidson himself had vanished like smoke, but they were still wanted. Eleanor Mason for fraud and suspected murder. The Apache man known as Taza for killing a deputy. So they'd climbed higher into mountains where few white men ventured, living off the land. Free, but always watchful. "I saw bear sign yesterday," Taza said casually. "Big male, denning near the ridge." Eleanor's hand went automatically to the rifle, always within reach. She'd become an excellent shot through necessity. "How close?" "Half mile. Far enough if we don't bother him." He set aside his work, studying her in the firelight. "But that's not what concerns me." She knew that tone. "What then?" "You haven't bled in 2 moons. Eleanor's breath caught. She'd been ignoring the signs, attributing her missed courses to hard living and stress. But deep down, she'd known. "Yes." Taza moved closer, his hand hovering over her still flat belly as if asking permission. She guided it to rest there, covering it with her own. "A child," he said softly, wonder and worry warring in his voice. "Our child. Does it change things?" Eleanor asked, though she feared the answer. A baby meant no more running at a moment's notice, meant vulnerability in a world that had shown them little mercy. "Everything." He drew her against him carefully, as if she'd become fragile overnight. "But not what's between us. Only, we need more than caves and campfires now." Eleanor knew he was right. Winter in the high mountains was harsh enough for 2 experienced adults. An infant would need warmth, shelter, stability, things their fugitive life couldn't provide. "Where?" she asked simply. "South, Mexico, maybe, or west to California. Somewhere we can disappear. Start fresh." He pressed his lips to her temple. "Somewhere our child can grow up free." They made love that night with new tenderness, aware of the life growing between them. The firelight painted their bodies in gold and shadow as they moved together, whispering promises and plans. Outside, the storm raged, but within their shelter was warmth and hope. The next weeks were spent in preparation. Taza hunted and preserved meat while Eleanor worked hides into clothing and blankets they could trade. They would need supplies for the journey, things the wilderness couldn't provide. That meant risk, going to settlements, interacting with people who might recognize them from wanted posters. Their first test came at a Mexican trading post 50 miles south. Eleanor waited with the horses while Taza negotiated, but the trader was more interested in goods than questions. They left with flour, salt, ammunition, and small luxuries Eleanor had almost forgotten. Soap, needles, a small mirror that made her laugh and cry at her reflection. "You're beautiful," Taza said, watching her pin up her hair for the first time in months. "I look like a wild woman," but she smiled, seeing not the deputy marshal's proper wife, but someone stronger, more real. "My wild woman," he corrected, pulling her close. "My warrior." They followed old trails west, skirting settlements, trading with isolated ranchers who cared more for fresh meat than old news from Kansas. Eleanor's pregnancy progressed without complication, her body adapting as it had to everything else this new life demanded. Taza tended her with fierce protectiveness, finding herbs the Apache women had shown him to ease her sickness, building comfortable camps each night. But peace couldn't last. They were camped by a spring in western New Mexico when riders appeared, 4 men, hard-faced and travel-worn. Eleanor's heart sank as she recognized the type. Bounty hunters. Word of the reward on them must have spread. "Stay behind me," Taza murmured, though his wounded shoulder meant he couldn't draw a bow with full strength. The lead rider, a grizzled man with cold gray eyes, raised empty hands. "Easy there, friend, just looking for water." "Spring's free to all," Taza replied carefully. The men dismounted, letting their horses drink. But Eleanor saw how they positioned themselves, cutting off escape routes. The leader's eyes kept flicking to her, recognition dawning. "Say," he drawled, "you folks haven't seen a woman traveling alone, have you? Pretty thing, brown hair, about this tall. He gestured vaguely. Might be calling herself Eleanor Mason? No single women out here, Taza said. Too dangerous. That's true enough. The bounty hunter's hand drifted toward his gun. Thing is, I'm thinking we already found her. Nice try with the Apache clothes. Ma'am, but those are white woman's eyes. Everything happened fast. Taza moved, but the pregnancy had made Eleanor slow. One of the men grabbed her, using her as a shield. She felt the cold press of a gun barrel against her temple. Now, no need for unpleasantness, the leader said. $1,000 bounty on the lady. 500 on you. Breed. Come quiet like, and he never finished. The arrow took him in the chest, not from Taza, but from the rocks above. More arrows followed as Apache warriors materialized like ghosts. Eleanor recognized faces from the band they'd stayed with, led by Taza's cousin, Nayeli. The bounty hunters didn't stand a chance. 3 died quickly. The 4th, the one holding Eleanor, tried to bargain, but she felt his grip loosen as panic set in. She drove her elbow back hard, breaking free as Taza's knife found its mark. When the dust settled, 4 bodies cooled in the desert sun. Nayeli approached, speaking rapid Apache with Taza. Eleanor caught enough to understand. They'd been tracking the bounty hunters for days, knowing they were hunting their relatives. Family protects family, Nayeli said in English, nodding to Eleanor's obvious pregnancy. This child will be of 2 worlds. We'll need all the protection we can give. They burned the bodies and scattered the ashes, taking the horses and supplies. No one would ever find trace of the bounty hunters. But it was a warning. They were still hunted. Would always be hunted as long as they stayed in the territories. California. Taza decided that night. Gold country. So many people coming and going, no one notices a few more. Eleanor agreed, though the journey would be hard with her advancing pregnancy. They traveled with Nayeli's band for protection, following ancient paths through the desert. At night, the Apache women taught Eleanor their birthing wisdom, preparing her for bringing life into the world without doctor or midwife. The labor came early, in a canyon painted gold by autumn aspens. Eleanor gripped Taza's hands, biting down on leather to muffle her screams. The Apache women chanted softly, guiding her through the waves of pain. And then, as the sun touched the canyon rim, their son announced himself with lusty cries that echoed off ancient stone. He's perfect, Eleanor gasped through tears, holding the squalling infant, dark hair like his father, her blue eyes already visible. A child of 2 worlds indeed. Taza looked stunned, touching the baby with trembling fingers. A son, our son. He spoke words in Apache, then English, a blessing, a promise, a prayer. They named him Samuel Redhawk, Samuel for Eleanor's grandfather who'd shown her kindness, Redhawk for Taza's clan. The Apache celebrated with quiet ceremony, welcoming this new bridge between peoples, but even in joy, they knew they couldn't linger. Winter was coming to the high country, and California still lay weeks ahead. They pressed on, Eleanor riding with Samuel bound to her chest in Apache fashion, drawing strength from his warm weight. The final challenge came at the Colorado River crossing. The ferry operator studied them suspiciously, a white woman with a mixed child, traveling with an Apache man. His questions grew pointed, his manner hostile. Eleanor saw him glance repeatedly at a stack of papers that might have been wanted posters. That night, they didn't wait for the ferry. Under cover of darkness, Taza led them to a place where the river ran shallow. They crossed in moonlight, horses swimming. Samuel held high above the water, on the western shore. They were beyond the reach of Kansas law, in California territory where different rules applied. We made it, Eleanor breathed, collapsing on the riverbank. The journey's just beginning, Taza reminded her. But he was smiling. Now we build a life. They looked down at Samuel sleeping between them, this child who would grow up free, knowing both his heritages, bound by neither. Eleanor reached for Taza's hand, thinking of all they'd survived to reach this moment. Together, she said. Always, he replied. as the California sun rose on their new beginning. The canyon walls closed in like a trap, red stone rising on either side to block out all but a ribbon of sky. Eleanor clutched Samuel to her chest, the 2-year-old whimpering at the tension radiating from his parents. They'd been running for 3 days, ever since Taza spotted the dust cloud on their back trail. Too organized to be random travelers, too persistent to be anything but hunters. "How many?" Eleanor asked, though she'd already counted the horses' tracks at their last water stop. 8, maybe 10. Taza guided his mount around a fallen boulder, his movements careful despite the urgency. His shoulder, the old wound that never quite healed right, was bothering him again. Though he'd die before admitting weakness, they'd built a good life in the California mining town of Cedar Creek. 2 years of peace, Taza working as a tracker for the better miners, Eleanor taking in sewing and teaching letters to miners' children. They'd been the Red Hawk family. Quiet, hard-working, keeping to themselves. Samuel had learned to walk on those mountain paths, speaking his first words in a mix of English and Apache that made other children laugh, but filled his parents with pride. Then Marshall Davidson had arrived. Eleanor had seen him first, standing outside the general store like a specter from her nightmares. Older, grayer, but unmistakably the man who'd ordered her husband's death and tried to claim her as payment for silence. She'd grabbed Samuel and fled, warning Taza through the Cherokee woman who sold herbs at the market. They'd left everything, their cabin, their saved gold, the life they'd carved from nothing. Now, 3 days into the desert, their horses were failing and their water was running low. There. Taza pointed to a narrow crack in the canyon wall. "Old Smuggler's Trail. Leads up to the rim." Eleanor studied the path, barely wide enough for a horse. Switchbacking up sheer stone. One misstep meant death. But the sounds of pursuit were growing closer, echoing off the canyon walls. "Can Samuel? I'll carry him." Taza was already dismounting, fashioning a sling from blanket strips. "You lead the horses." They began the climb as the sun touched the western rim, painting everything in shades of blood. Eleanor's mare picked her way carefully, sensing the danger. While behind them, Taza moved with Samuel bound to his back, the boy instinctively silent as his Apache blood taught him. Halfway up, disaster struck. Eleanor's packhorse, exhausted and frightened, missed its footing. The animal's scream as it fell seemed to go on forever, ending in a terrible impact far below. With it went half their supplies, including precious water. "Keep going," Taza urged when she froze. "They'll have heard that." "Indeed." Shouts rose from below. Eleanor forced herself to focus on the next step, then the next. Her legs burned, her lungs fought for air in the thin atmosphere. But she climbed. For Samuel. For the future they refused to surrender. They reached the rim as darkness fell, collapsing behind a cluster of wind-carved rocks. Below, torches appeared in the canyon. Their pursuers had found the trail. "We can't outrun them," Eleanor said quietly. It wasn't despair, just fact. Their horses were done, and Samuel couldn't survive a hard flight across the desert. Taza's face was stone in the starlight. "Then we don't run." He led them along the rim to where the Ancient Ones had made their stand, a natural fortress of stone, defensible, with a spring hidden in its depths. The old Apache had shown him this place. Speaking of last stands and warriors' choices, they made camp in the ruins, Eleanor tending Samuel while Taza prepared. He had his rifle, his bow, knives, weapons enough to make their hunters pay dearly. But against 10 men, the outcome was inevitable. "There's another way," Eleanor said as Samuel finally slept. "I could go down. Surrender. Davidson wants me, not you. Take Samuel and—" "No." Taza's response was instant, fierce. "We stand together or not at all. Our son will not grow up knowing his mother sacrificed herself for him, will not carry that weight." He pulled her close, mindful of the sleeping child between them. "We are family. We fight as family." The first scouts appeared at dawn, 2 men, cautious, rifles ready. Taza's arrow took one in the shoulder. sending him tumbling back down the trail. The second dove for cover, shouting warnings to those below. "Eleanor Whitmore!" Davidson's voice carried up from the canyon. Age had roughened it but not dimmed its authority. "You've led us quite a chase, but it's over. Come down peacefully and I'll guarantee safe passage for your companions." "Like you guaranteed justice for those Apache miners?" Eleanor shouted back. "Like you guaranteed my husband would stop his trafficking?" A long pause. Then, "Your husband was a fool who got greedy. You could have been reasonable, could have walked away. Instead, you had to play crusader. I played human being, something you've forgotten." Gunfire erupted as Davidson's men tried rushing the trail. Taza and Eleanor fired in concert, their hours of practice paying off. Men fell back, some wounded, but more kept coming. They had numbers, time, ammunition, everything the defenders lacked. By midday, Taza was down to 3 arrows. Eleanor had 6 bullets. Samuel, mercifully, played quietly with stones. Too young to understand the danger, but old enough to sense his parents' fear. "They're flanking us," Taza observed, spotting movement on the far rim. "Found another way up." Eleanor felt despair creeping in. They'd fought so hard, come so far, only to die on this ancient battleground. She looked at Samuel, his father's proud features, her stubborn chin, and made a decision. "The spring," she said, "the cave behind it. Take Samuel and—" "Together or not at all," Taza repeated, but she saw the same recognition in his eyes. They were out of options. That's when they heard it. A sound that didn't belong. Singing. Apache voices raised in war songs, echoing off the canyon walls. Davidson's men heard it too, their advance faltering as ancient fears rose in their hearts. Over the rim came warriors, not many, perhaps a dozen, but moving with purpose. Leading them was Nayeli, Taza's cousin, paint on his face and death in his eyes. Behind him rode others Eleanor recognized from their time with the band, come to repay old debts. The battle was brief but vicious. Davidson's men, caught between defenders above and warriors behind, scattered. Some fled down the trail, others tried to fight and died badly. Davidson himself, gray-haired and desperate, made it to the ruins before Taza's knife found him. "You!" Davidson gasped, blood frothing his lips. All this for a savage and a whore. Eleanor didn't let him finish. Her shot was clean, merciful, more than he'd ever given others. Davidson fell, his reign of corruption ending in dust and blood on ancient stone. In the aftermath, as Apache warriors dealt with survivors, Eleanor found herself shaking, not from violence or fear, but from the realization that it was over, truly over. The past had finally been faced and defeated. "You came," Taza said to Nayeli, gripping his cousin's arm. "Family." Nayeli replied simply, "The boy. He is blood. We protect blood." He looked at Eleanor with respect. All blood. They stayed with the Apache band for a moon. Healing, planning. The warriors had brought disturbing news. The army was moving against the free bands, forcing more onto reservations. Soon there would be no wild places left, no room for those who lived between worlds. "California coast," suggested Standing Bear, an elder who'd traveled widely. Spanish land grants breaking up, Mexicans, Indians, whites all mixing, a place where mixed blood doesn't stand out so much. It made sense. In the aftermath of the gold rush, California was reinventing itself. Old ways were dying, new ones being born. Perhaps there was room in that chaos for a family like theirs. They parted from the band with tears and blessings. Nayeli pressed a medicine bundle into Eleanor's hands. "Protection for Samuel," he said, "for the journey ahead." The warriors melted back into the desert, ghosts of a fading world. The journey west was different this time. No pursuit, no constant fear. They traveled as a family among other families fleeing or seeking. Chinese miners, Mexican vaqueros, freed slaves heading for promise. America in motion. All its peoples churning together into something new. Samuel rode his own pony now, chattering in 3 languages, making friends with every child they met, watching him. Eleanor felt hope she'd thought lost forever. This boy would grow up truly free, unbounded by the prejudices that had nearly destroyed his parents. "Look," Taza said one evening as they crested the final mountains. "The ocean." There it was, vast, blue, endless. The edge of the continent, where journeys ended and began. Eleanor had never seen it before, this border between worlds. Samuel squealed with delight, pointing at wheeling gulls. "Home?" he asked in his piping voice. Eleanor looked at Taza, saw her own thought reflected in his eyes. Home wasn't a place. It was the three of them together, facing whatever came. "Yes," she told their son, pulling both her men close. "Home." They descended toward the sea as the sun set behind them, painting their shadows long across the golden hills. Whatever challenges waited in this new land, they would meet them together. They had survived the desert, faced their demons, found their strength. Now it was time to live. Eleanor set down her pen, flexing fingers stiff from writing. Through the window of their cliff-top home, the Pacific stretched endless and blue, fog beginning its evening crawl toward shore. 3 years had passed since they'd found this place, an abandoned homestead north of Monterey. Far enough from town for privacy, but close enough for Samuel's schooling. "Mama, look!" Samuel burst through the door, clutching a handful of shells. At 5, he was all energy and questions, his mixed heritage showing in high cheekbones and eyes that shifted from blue to green depending on the light. "Found treasures. Beautiful. Little warrior." Eleanor examined each shell with proper seriousness. "Where's Papa?" "Teaching Miguel to track rabbits." Samuel scrambled onto her lap, smelling of salt and sage. "Can I read your writing?" Eleanor glanced at her journal, the story of their journey, written for Samuel when he was older. "One day, when you understand more." Taza appeared in the doorway, his neighbor's son Miguel beside him. At 8, the Mexican boy worshipped Taza, following him like a shadow. It warmed Eleanor's heart. Their differences meant nothing to children. "Good hunting?" she asked. 2 rabbits. Miguel's getting better." Taza ruffled the boy's hair. "Run home now. Your mother will worry." After Miguel left, Taza studied Eleanor's face. "You're thinking of them again." She nodded. Letters had found them even here, Nayeli's band forced onto the reservation. Proud warriors reduced to government rations. Others simply vanished, swallowed by an expanding nation that had no room for the old ways. "We could help," Eleanor said quietly. "The gold we've saved would buy maybe a month's food, not freedom." Taza's voice carried old pain. "That world is ending. Eleanor, we can't stop it. But we survived, found our place. Because we adapted, became something new." He gestured out the window where Samuel played in the yard, practicing with the small bow Taza had made him. That's his world now. Not purely Apache, not purely white. Something else. Eleanor knew he was right, but it still hurt. They'd built a good life here. Taza guided hunting parties and tracked lost livestock. Eleanor taught at the mission school twice a week, her past buried under years of careful fiction. They were the Red Hawk family, respectable, if unusual. Even Father Miguel at the mission had stopped asking about their marriage papers. That night, as fog muffled the world in gray silence, they sat by their fire. Samuel slept between them, clutching his favorite shell. These quiet evenings were Eleanor's favorite times, when past and future faded, leaving only the present moment. "I dream of her sometimes," Taza said unexpectedly. "My mother, she stands in the cave, singing the old songs, but her voice grows fainter each time." Eleanor took his hand. "She lives in what you teach Samuel, in how you honor the land. It's not enough. It has to be." They held each other in the firelight, 2 survivors clinging together as the world changed around them. Outside, foghorns called mournfully across the water, marking safe passage for ships carrying settlers to new lives. The seasons turned. Samuel grew tall and quick. Learning English letters from Eleanor and Apache stories from Taza, he moved between worlds with the fluid grace of the truly adaptable, equally comfortable in the mission school and the wild hills. Eleanor filled journal after journal, documenting their life. Not the grand adventures of their early years, but smaller victories. Samuel's first successful hunt, Taza's acceptance by the local ranchers, her own appointment as head teacher, the ordinary miracles of a life hard won. One autumn day, a stranger appeared at their door. Eleanor's hand went instinctively to the rifle just inside, old habits dying hard. But the man held up empty hands, his face weathered but kind. "Mrs. Red Hawk? I'm James Morrison, attorney from San Francisco. I have news regarding your late husband's estate." Eleanor's blood froze. After 7 years, the past had found them again, but Morrison's next words surprised her. "Your husband, your first husband, had a brother in Pennsylvania, died last month, no heirs except you, left a considerable sum." He named a figure that made Eleanor sit down hard. "How did you find me?" Morrison smiled. "Federal marshal named Thompson. Said you'd helped break up a corruption ring years back. Gave me this address. Also said to tell you all, old warrants have been vacated. Seems Davidson kept poor records. And without him to testify..." He shrugged. "You're free and clear, ma'am." After he left, Eleanor sat stunned. Taza found her there an hour later, still holding the papers. "What does it mean?" he asked after she explained. "It means choices." Eleanor said slowly, "Real choices. Samuel could go to university. We could travel. We could..." She stopped, seeing his expression. "What? Could we go back to the desert?" The question hung between them. Both knew there was nothing to return to, their cabin long burned, the Apache band scattered or confined. But the yearning in his voice broke her heart. "We could visit," she said carefully. "Show Samuel where his story began." They made the journey that spring, when wildflowers carpeted the desert. The landscape was already changing. New roads, telegraph lines, towns sprouting where only silence had reigned. But the bones of the land remained, red rock and endless sky. Their old cabin was indeed gone, but the spring still flowed. They camped there 3 nights, Taza teaching Samuel the names of stars in Apache, Eleanor showing him where she'd first seen his father. On the 3rd dawn, they climbed to the sacred cave. It had been ransacked, probably by treasure hunters. The ancient paintings remained, but Taza's mother's belongings were gone. He stood silent for a long moment, then began to sing, soft at first, then stronger. The old words echoed off stone, and Samuel's young voice joined in, following sounds he didn't fully understand but felt in his blood. Eleanor wept then, for all they'd lost, all they'd saved, all that could never be recovered. When the song ended, Taza placed his hand on the cave wall, beside the ancient spiral that meant journey. "She's not here," he said quietly. "She lives here." He placed his other hand over Samuel's heart. They returned to California changed. The money brought security but not happiness, that they'd already built themselves. Eleanor established a school for mixed-race children, taught by those who understood living between worlds. Taza worked with vaqueros, preserving the old ways of reading land and weather. And Samuel grew, bridging worlds with increasing confidence. At 10, he could track like his father and write poetry like his mother. He spoke 3 languages fluently and dreamed, he said, in colors that had no names. "What will you be?" Eleanor asked him once, watching him practice with bow and pen with equal dedication. "Myself," he answered simply, and she knew they'd succeeded in what mattered most. The journals grew thick on Eleanor's shelf, no longer records of flight and fear, but chronicles of building and becoming. She wrote of Taza's first gray hairs, of Samuel's growth spurts, of neighbor children who came to learn and stayed to belong. Small stories, personal victories, the quiet revolution of lives lived honestly. One evening, as sunset painted the ocean gold, Taza found Eleanor on their cliff top, writing as always. "Still documenting?" he asked, settling beside her. Still remembering. She leaned into his warmth. "Do you ever regret?" "No." His answer was immediate. "Every step brought us here." He gestured to where Samuel sat with friends, Mexican, Chinese, Indian, white, all laughing together. Brought us to that. Eleanor smiled, remembering the frightened widow who'd fled west with nothing but guilt and forged papers. That woman was a ghost now, replaced by someone stronger, someone whole. Remember what you asked me once? Taza continued. If we'd meet again, in another life. By the creek, Eleanor murmured. I remember. We don't need another life. He lifted her chin, eyes still dark and deep as the day they'd met. This one gave us everything. They kissed there on the cliff top. Two souls who'd found each other across impossible odds. Behind them, their son's laughter carried on the wind. Before them, the ocean stretched endless with possibility. And in Eleanor's journal, their story waited, not ended, but continuing. Each day a new page in the tale of love that conquered difference, that built bridges from understanding, that proved sometimes the greatest adventure is simply learning to live free. The fog rolled in as it always did, softening the edges of the world. But the Red Hawk family remained, solid and real, proof that even in the hardest ground, with patience and courage, love could grow wild and strong. They'd cross deserts and divisions to build this life. Now, they would live it, each day a choice, each moment a gift, each memory a seed for the future they'd created together. In the growing dusk, Eleanor wrote the final lines of that day's entry. Home is not a place, but a promise kept. We are home. Thank you, dear listeners, for joining us around the campfire for this tale of love and survival in the Old West. I'd love to hear where in the world you're listening to these stories tonight. Please subscribe to Wild West Campfire and share your thoughts in the comments below. Until we meet again under these stars, keep the campfire burning in your hearts.